The Vantage No-Till Champion Award is presented annually to a Virginia farmer who has demonstrated exceptional leadership in both implementing or putting into practice and promoting or encouraging others to adopt no-till, other soil building management practices, and a conservation ethic. Today, the 2025 No-Till Champion Award is being presented to Paul Davis of New Kent County, Virginia. Before Paul comes up to get his award, we're going to take some time to tell you about Paul, about how he farms, and why he is so deserving of this honor. Paul's name will now be added to the list of previous No-Till Champion Award recipients, which you can find on the Vantage website. One thing that sets Paul apart from all of the previous winners is that he is not from the Shenandoah Valley. This is fitting, given that Vantage is now broadening its geographic focus to include all of Virginia, not just the Valley. So where is Paul from? He's from New Kent County in the Virginia coastal plain. At least compared to the Shenandoah Valley, it's a land of wide rivers, flat fields, very few silos and fences, and lots of grain production. More specifically, Paul is from a beautiful farm on the banks of the tidal Pamunkey River near West Point. Paul's father, Boogie Davis, and 4 of his brothers bought and cleared 1,200 acres here in the mid-1900s. Paul has had many adventures, but he never went too far from this place, and as we'll see, he followed very closely in his father's footsteps in many ways. For example, if we zoom in here on the place where Paul lives, we see here Paul's parents' house where he was raised. When the time came, here is where Paul built his home with his wife Marion and raised their 2 children. And here in the middle is where the family built a house specifically for guests and socializing, what they call the playhouse. That gives you a feel for how important hospitality and fellowship are to this family. Here's a picture of Paul, his mother, and his father Boogie on the deck at the playhouse. This is the first of 3 rainbows you're going to see in this presentation. Maybe rainbows follow Paul around. For those who know him and his personality, that really wouldn't be much of a surprise. So who is Paul Davis? First and maybe foremost, he is a Hokie. You're likely going to see a lot of Virginia Tech hats and other references to Tech in this presentation. He is also a farmer, an agronomist, an educator, a competitor, an innovator, a test plot specialist, an advocate, a role model, and a friend. And he is also all of these in a no-till cover crop and soil health context. In other words, he's also a no-till and cover crop farmer. He's also a no-till and cover crop educator, and so on. Here's an overview of Paul's operation today. It starts with 15 acres of pumpkins. Before Paul retired from extension to farm full-time with his dad, pumpkins were their focus, so the operation was called Davis Produce, and the name stuck. Paul's cash grain enterprise has grown to 800 acres today, including corn, wheat, and soybeans. Another high-value and very time-consuming enterprise is research plots, which currently occupy about 75 acres per year. Paul puts in these plots under contract for industry and sometimes university researchers, and he conducts trials on seed, fertility, and chemicals for corn, wheat, soybeans, and pumpkins. Paul practices continuous no-till on all these acres and has not done any conventional tillage for about 25 years. Paul also practices what we call continuous no-fallow on every acre. He always has something green and growing. This means 4 crops every 2 years on every acre. For example, corn followed by winter wheat, then double crop soybeans followed by a winter cover crop. This in turn means that another major crop on the farm is cover crops, and Paul manages those covers like crops with purpose and attention to detail. For example, by drilling them whenever he can, as this picture of a rye veg cover crop shows. This is what soil prep ahead of pumpkin planting looks like on the Davis farm. Here Boogie is rolling down a high biomass cover crop mix, and this is what Paul's no-till pumpkins look like early in the season. I think what Boogie is trying to show us in this picture is that these pumpkin roots don't seem to have too much trouble penetrating this no-till soil. And here are Paul's no-till pumpkins later in the season with some of his family in the field, including his wife Marion in the pink shirt. You'll remember that one of Paul's other high-value crops is research plots. If you look carefully, you'll see an odd crop pattern in this field. When we zoom in, you can see a lot of small plots, which require custom equipment to plant and harvest and so on. This starts to give you a sense of the investment and effort involved in managing up to 75 acres of research plots every year. So Paul's a farmer. Who else is he? He's also an agronomist with ag degrees first from Ferrum College and then, just like his dad, from Virginia Tech. He's also an educator who spent 28 years as a Virginia Tech Extension agent. In this, he also literally followed in his dad's footsteps. Paul and his father, Boogie, were both extension agents in their home county of New Kent. When Boogie retired in 1989, Paul immediately took over the job for the next 20 years. Paul might have retired 16 years ago, but he never stopped educating. Since then, he has been involved in countless events as a speaker, field day host, and so on. He's even helped educate Vantage audiences in the past. Here he is participating on a panel at the Vantage Winter Conference back in the Matt Yancey era. Who else is Paul Davis? He's a fierce competitor, up for any challenge in the field or on the field. He was a cornerback and captain for the Ferrum College football team in 1978. He was also a member of the Ferrum 1977 Junior College National Championship team. He then followed in Boogie's footsteps and played ball for Virginia Tech. But while Boogie played baseball, Paul played football and was team captain in 1980. Today, he still is a co-holder of the Virginia Tech record for most interceptions in a single game. To give you a sense of Paul's competitiveness, here's a picture of him after finishing the Monument Avenue 10K race in Richmond. He's holding up 9 fingers because this was his 9th year running it. But for Paul, it's never just a fun run, it's a fun race to train for and compete in. For example, at age 55, he placed 5th in his age division, which included more than 800 other runners. And of course, he and Boogie have always been eager to compete in anything agricultural, like the wheat yield contest they both won in 2017. But this award that Paul is getting is not about sports, it's about no-till. So what about no-till? Well, when you have a license plate like Paul's that says never till, that probably means you're pretty well committed to the practice. More evidence of a commitment to no-till are these pictures that Paul provided of his moldboard plow and chisel plow. And as we said before, Paul's been at this no-till thing for a while. Here's a video clip of Paul from back in 2011 when he was featured in a short movie promoting no-till called Gaining Ground. Back then, Vantage was actually one of the partners involved in making this movie.
We have converted every acre that we farmed into continuous no-till, and it has a cover crop on it. With continuous no-till, we spend half the time on the tractors we used to. We're spending a lot more time with our families. We're farming the same amount of land or more land in less time and making more money. The continuous no-till, I'd say, is the number one issue. Stop tilling, and then as soon as you get comfortable with that, jump right into having cover crops. That is a next step to increase your yields.
So Paul is a no-tiller who, as we just saw, has been planting green for a long time. But who else is he? He's also an innovator who might be best known as a pioneer in purposeful cover crop management in Eastern Virginia. One of his innovations was to plant a rye-vetch mix in order to get good overwintering soil coverage, then selectively spray out the rye in the spring to release the vetch and get a monoculture legume carpet like this with maximum nitrogen availability. Some Virginia farmers now call this the Paul Davis method of vetch management. And Paul never stops trying new things with cover crops. Here he is last year not unloading, but loading seed into the combine to supply his new combine-mounted cover crop seeder, which harvests cash crops and spreads cover crop seed in the same pass. Paul is also an innovator in other ways. For example, Paul's insect pest management strategy has evolved to where he now focuses on giving his beneficials, like this lady beetle larva, the habitat they need to thrive and he lets them take care of the bad guys without the help of any broadcast insecticides, including on pumpkins. Paul has also been a leader in precision input management, including the use of green seeker sensor technology for on-the-go variable rate nitrogen, and as shown in this picture, subdividing fields into zones for variable rate seeding, liming, and fertilization. Who else is Paul Davis? He's also an on-farm test plot specialist, or maybe even fanatic. As you've heard, he's now translated his interest in on-farm testing into a significant enterprise doing contract research plots. Before that, he spent decades as an extension agent pulling a way wagon around Eastern Virginia to help farmers collect practical on-farm data to inform their decision. And last but definitely not least, Paul does on-farm testing for himself. He's always looking to refine his management based on real numbers from his own operation. That can mean getting on his knees to collect cover crop biomass samples, which is something Paul has done many times. But more likely, this means collecting yield monitor data. Paul will tell you that his yield monitor is one of the most important tools on his farm today. Setting up comparisons and measuring resulting yields is how Paul assesses what works and what doesn't. And with a corn yield showing here at 284 bushels per acre, some things are definitely working right for Paul. Some of the most significant long-term on-farm testing Paul has done involves cover crops and their impact on nitrogen supply to corn. Paul has demonstrated many times that nitrogen fertilization of corn can be significantly reduced behind his legume cover crops. Now Paul is digging into the question of how much N his long-term no-till soil can provide to corn even without a cover crop. Who else is Paul Davis? He's an advocate for no-till and soil health who, whenever we ask, is always ready to say yes and stand up for the cause in front of any audience or camera. For example, in 2022, Paul let us bring more cameras and microphones onto the farm when we helped Sustainable Chesapeake create a series of 4 videos about purposeful cover crop management. Now we're going to watch some clips of Paul and his farm that we pulled out of those videos.
Yeah, my father passed away in August. He was 94 and a half. Tomorrow it would be 95. And I retired when I was 53 so I could farm with my dad. And we farmed together for 13 years. The best days of my life. My name is Paul Davis, and I'm about 600 feet from where I was born and raised. Dad said, even though he was in his 80s and 90s, boy, if you're not making a major change every 5 years in your production, you're falling behind. How I got started with cover crops was back in 2007, and it couldn't have worked more perfectly. This is where I want to be. This is how we can make a difference in our soils. All right, ready to work. We want the soil to be alive, and our soil is alive today. We do not use any insecticides post-emergence because we have so many beneficials, primarily spiders. We don't want to kill those beneficials. But we do get a seed treated with an insecticide for any grub issues. See that? Somebody's gonna think I planted that there just for the video. Just every time I dug, I pulled up an earthworm. There's another one right there. See that one? But what is amazing is it's like it's been disked. All you see is earthworm castings everywhere. It's a thing of beauty. Something in this soil is so hungry and is working so hard, it's taken away all the residue from 4 crops in 2 years, all left on the ground. All we did was just take some grain off of here. All the rest of that is back in the soil. Our organic matter is over 3% in most of our fields now, only because we started doing intensive cover crops on it. The biggest change in any one field we've found. There's a 40-acre field back in the woods. It used to, once it started getting a little bit dry, the ground would crack and it just didn't hold moisture, and if it did hold it, it wouldn't give it to the plant. The rotations and this cover crop have made it a different soil. Today, the soil is much browner. It's not as red. Soil penetration is much easier. Digging and looking at roots, it's much more mellow, down to a foot than it used to be. It survives a week or two of dry weather now when it did not used to. It's gone from a soil productivity 4 to a soil productivity group 2 now in yield potential. I did get a master's degree in weed science, so my philosophy is if you can grow it, I can kill it. With these cover crops, there's less weeds to grow. When I'm out there in cover crops this high on my hands and knees taking biomass samples, you got to think about it. It's 3 to 4 inches of just a carpet. There's no weeds coming through there. We've been putting down a mixture of residual herbicides, but we have cut back on the amount of residuals we're using. And it just feels right. Up till 3 years ago, we were going by the standard recommendation of putting a pound of commercial nitrogen per bushel of expected yield. This year, this is 2022, I got a quote for nitrogen, $1.16 a pound. You got to change with time because of the price of grain, but primarily the price of our inputs, the chemicals, the fertilizer, the seed. Yields in corn have gone up probably 5-6 bushels a year. And to get that, we have been cutting back on our fertilizer. You ask people 20 years ago, that's impossible. We have changed our soil. If these root systems are down there 4 or 5 feet, pulling up any available P and K to get that biomass, that is readily available nutrients to our next crop. We're not losing anything to erosion. Nothing is leaching through the soil. So there's an opportunity to improve your soil quality in a person's farming career.
So Paul is a movie star. Who else is he? Obviously, he's a role model for the next generation of Virginia farmers. Here he is hosting a group of innovative no-tillers, including some current Vantage board members, at his farm for a brainstorming session. Paul is also a role model for the next generation of the Davis family. Here are his grandchildren, Grady and Eve, in the cornfield, and of course, in the rye vetch cover crop. And it looks like these kids aren't just playing on the farm. Grady is just tall enough to vacuum out planter boxes, and you can see Eve and her grandmother directing the job from the tailgate. As we come to the end here, I'll ask again, who is Paul Davis? When we asked Paul to provide some pictures for this presentation, he sent most of them with captions. His caption for this picture of the spider and soybeans was, "My good friend." And his caption for this picture of him on the dock outside his home was, "Life is good and God is great." This is a reminder of what probably makes Paul more special than anything else, his incredibly positive attitude. So Paul is also a friend to the spiders, to the soil, and to all of us who know and love him. Do rainbows really follow Paul around? It's hard to say, but sometimes it feels like it. So this ends our presentation about Paul. You now know more about who he is and what makes Paul Davis so deserving to be the 2025 Vantage No-Till Champion.